Here I am in Great Britain, having traveled all the way from the east coast of the USA to celebrate the 400th episode of Plain Talking UK. It's kind of funny how I think about the PTUK podcast. You see, I'm very proud of them, like the pride I would feel for a younger brother. You got to understand that sometimes, most times in fact, I think about a whole bunch of podcasts as family. There's the Airplane Geeks, the oldest sibling, then the airline pilot guy, the middle child, and our younger brother, Plain Talking UK. Now there are other parts of the family too. For example, there's the Plane Safety podcast, the adopted sibling that someone left on our doorstep one day. We took them in because, well, it's a mitzvah, the right thing to do, and of course, there's always room at our table. Then there are some of those odd podcast cousins. Flying in Life is one of them. So is the A320 podcast, and of course, Opposing Bases. We have some drunken uncles too, though I promise not to talk about them here. But we're a big happy family, too big in fact, for all of us to gather together in one place, so not everyone could be here in person to celebrate PTUK's big day. The fact is, I wasn't sure I was going to attend this celebration in person either. Do you know why I'm here? Well, you can blame Brian Coleman for it. Yes, Pasadena Brian Coleman, former associate producer of the Airplane Geeks podcast and creator and host of the Journey is the Reward podcast, you can blame him. I certainly do. It's his fault. He's the reason I'm here. It all started almost exactly 6 years ago. It was February of 2016 when Brian called me and asked if I wanted to go to the Farnborough Air Show. I was reluctant. Why would I want to travel all that way for another air show? I didn't know Brian that well back then. Neither of us can remember exactly when we actually met in person. It was sometime before that phone call when we recorded a show as part of the Airplane Geeks at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum Udvar-Hazy Center. It took me a couple of years to find out that Brian can sell ice to Eskimos. Needless to say, within 2 weeks of that February 2016 phone call, the trip to Farnborough was planned. I've regretted it ever since. It was during that trip that I got to meet Nev, an impeccable host I might add, and Carlos and Matt and Owen and Pip and Al and on and on and on. You know, all the usual suspects. It was just awful. I found out I really liked them. And then they seemed to like me too, or at least tolerated me enough to be able to humor me into believing that they liked me. It was during that trip that I first appeared on PTUK. It was a live show from Farnborough, on the deck of the airshow press area. In order to get that space, Carlos and I had to do some fancy talking, and ended up appearing together on the Farnborough Airshow radio network. All of us became friends, stayed pretty well in touch. Close enough that many of us got together the following year in Pittsburgh, thanks to Major Rick Bell. That, by the way, is when Matt learned of Brian's great sales abilities. Matt found himself in the middle of the Atlantic on a United 757, wondering how he got into that predicament. Like I said, you can blame Brian. Since then, Brian and I got into a rhythm of travel planning together. For the most part, he handles the air and I handle the ground. We did it for Pittsburgh and several more trips to the Smithsonian, and well, here I am. Yes, he did it again. Sure, they say forewarned is forearmed, but it doesn't often work that way. It was early April of last year when the phone rang again, and it was Brian. "Hey, Micah," he said, "I hear PTUK 400 is coming up in February 2022. I knew it was coming. I knew I would be helpless to his Svengali-like sales technique. "I've been looking at flights," he said. "You know, I hate to fly across the pond from the East Coast, not enough flight time to get any sleep, but I can arrange flights so we can meet in Chicago and cross the pond together." I didn't even fight it this time. I knew it would be a losing battle. I just said, "I'll start working on the hotels." The hotel situation wasn't too difficult. Other than some complications for our last night in the UK, Radisson split its reward program in two, one for the USA and one for the rest of the world. That took a couple of months to get straightened out so I could use my points here in the UK. Eventually, I was able to get us rooms at the Radisson Blu at Heathrow, a hotel I'd been wanting to try for quite a while. And a few weeks ago, I got an email from Radisson saying that they raised the yellow flag over the Radisson Blu. It's a COVID quarantine hotel now. They moved us to the Radisson Red, a lesser value for the same amount of points, but okay. As it turned out, that was the least of our travel problems. You see, United changed my flight reservations no less than 6 times. Originally, I was to leave Portland, Maine at 2 p.m. local, get into Chicago 2 hours later, then board our flight to LHR at about 9 p.m. local. Not so bad. Brian was getting in from LAX around 4, and we'd hang out in the Polaris Lounge together. Well, things changed over and over and over until I was leaving PWM at 7 a.m. and stuck at ORD until 9 p.m. and getting into LHR at 11 a.m. I would be traveling for 24 hours straight, all for what should be about 10 hours of travel time when leaving from Portland. I figured I was stuck, but Brian said, "Leave it to me." I don't know how he did it, but with all his persistence, maybe perseveration, and certainly sales technique, Brian found someone at United Reservations with God-like powers. One day I was eating dinner. A text came in. "I'm on the phone with United. They want to patch you in. Can we call you now?" That was a no-brainer. The phone rang a few minutes later. So we started talking to this reservation agent, and it turns out he's an airplane geek, in lowercase letters. Well, you know me and Brian, we can't talk to anyone without chatting them up. We learn he's been handling reservations since the days of Continental Airlines. He stayed on when they merged with United and became one of their top agents. He even creates and conducts training classes for other reservation agents. He tells us that flights to Chicago from Portland are limited, but asks how can he help? What would make it easy for us? Now remember, Brian doesn't like to fly across the pond from the east coast of the USA. It's just too short a flight for him to be able to settle down and sleep. So I said, okay, what if I flew to LA? Then Brian could meet me there, and we can go nonstop LAX to LHR together. The agent didn't blink an eye, and said, okay, and started looking for flights. He came back and told us that United no longer offered direct flights to London from LA, but they do from San Francisco. Brian asked if it could be arranged for us to meet at SFO, and the agent said, sure. I told you Brian was a silver-tongued devil, didn't I? I figured, what the heck? Rather than sitting in an airport for 12 hours, I might as well be flying. With the air circulation, mask mandates, and privacy of business class, I'd be safer from COVID in the air than at an airport. Plus, what a story! So I agreed to crisscross the USA in order to eventually cross the Atlantic all in one day. So like I said, blame it all on Brian. Well, and a bit on PTUK and the rest of my friends here who I so desperately wanted to see. And of course I have to take a bit of responsibility myself for being an airplane geek in both upper and lowercase letters. And that's the story of how Uncle Micah, your main man from Portland, Maine, on the northeast coast of the USA, flew to San Francisco to get here to Weybridge in the UK to celebrate 400 wonderful episodes of Plain Talking UK. Damn, I wonder what's going to happen for the 500th.